the Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, the comet and ice planet Polka hits number 1 in the charts with a bullet. Grandiose Planck constants and weather-top encounters with doom. Plus, we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of Alliance of Equals by Sharon Lee and Steve Miller. All right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Baen Senior Editor Tony Daniel. We talk with David Weber, Timothy Zahn, and Thomas Pope this time in part 1 of a 2-part interview discussing A Call to Vengeance, their great new entry in the Manticore Ascendant science fiction series set in David Weber's Honorverse. It's about 300 years before Honor Harrington's time. It's a wide-ranging, good-humored discussion with lots of insight and fun, so stay tuned for that. And we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of Sharon Lee and Steve Miller's Liaden Universe novel, Alliance of Equals. Now here's the news. The eyes have it with the March mass markets. That's because our 2 mass markets debuting this month are Angel Eyes by Michael Z. Williamson and Witchy Eye by D.J. Butler. One is science fiction and the other fantasy, so it's a binocular vision bonanza of wonder and adventure. All in favor, say aye. You know, E-Y-E, okay, I'll cut this out. At booksellers now is Angel Eyes, a new entry in Michael Z. Williamson's Freehold series. Angie never planned to be a spy. She was a veteran of the Freehold forces of grain and was now a freighter crew woman who hadn't set foot on the dirt of a world in 10 years. Angie was free, and that was the way she liked it. Then the war with Earth started. One thing Angie knew was human space. She knew where the UN troops garrisoned, the methods they used to scan and ship their own to control them. Even better, she had a mental map of the access conduits, the dive bars, and the make-out cubbies people used to get around restrictions. The UN forces may hold most of the stations, the docks, and the jump points, but now the Freehold of Grain has its own lethal weapon. The intelligence branch sends a freighter crewed with blazers, special forces troops, and all Angie has to do is lead them through the holes. Responsibility for the explosion and wreckage should be theirs, but war is complicated, and even the most unwilling of heroines can be forged in its crucible. Also out in March is Witchy Eye by D.J. Butler. Sarah Calhoun is the 15-year-old daughter of the Elector Andrew Calhoun, one of Appalachia's military heroes and one of the electors who gets to decide who will next ascend as the emperor of the New World. None of that matters to Sarah. She has a natural talent for hexing and one bad eye, and all she wants is to be left alone, especially by outsiders. But Sarah's world gets turned on its head at the Nashville Tobacco Fair when a Yankee wizard priest tries to kidnap her. Now, if Sarah cannot claim her heritage, it may be the end to her and her family, and to the world, where she is just beginning to find her place. Angel Eyes by Michael Z. Williamson and Witchy Eye by D.J. Butler are now available at booksellers everywhere. This is part 1 of a 2-part interview with David Weber, Timothy Zahn, and Thomas Pope. Part 2 of the interview will be available next time on the podcast.
I want to welcome David Weber, Timothy Zahn, and Thomas Pope to the podcast. Hello, fellas.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, Tony.
David Weber is the creator of the internationally best-selling Honor Harrington series and the Honorverse, within which that series is set. David has many New York Times bestsellers, and there are over 8 million David Weber books in print. Timothy Zahn is a Hugo Award winner and author of the New York Times #1 bestseller, Heir to Empire, and many other Star Wars books as well. And he is, of course, the author of the Cobra series here at Baen, born in Chicago. He earned a B.S. in Physics from Michigan State and M.S. in Physics from the University of Illinois. Baen published his popular Cobra trilogy in 1 volume. Tim continued the series with his Cobra War trilogy and the Cobra Rebellion series, which just finished up. His other popular series include the Conqueror and Dragonback novels, and Tom Pope is the founder of Bu9, a collection of professionals assisting David Weber in defining and documenting the Honorverse. Tom serves as lead editor for House of Steel, which is the Honorverse companion, and is collaborating with David and Timothy Zahn on the books that we are talking about today, the Manticore Ascendant series. Tom also works with robots at Carnegie Mellon University. Is that correct? That's right, Tom.
That is correct. In fact, I just got back from a competition.
Ah, cool. And out now at booksellers. I could mention many other David Weber series as well, but let's just get on with talking about Manticore Ascendant. Out now at booksellers is the third entry in the Manticore Ascendant series, which is A Call to Vengeance by David Weber and Timothy Zahn with Thomas Pope. So we open the book with an inquest, and our main character, Travis Long, is in the dock. What has gone on before? What's up with this? Is Travis in trouble?
Well, a little bit, yes, but it's more a matter of other people are in trouble, and they're bringing Travis in to try to hang them.
Historically, we are on the brink of the discovery of the Manticoran wormhole junction by Manticore. The bad guys already know something's out there. So that's where it sits in the history of the Star Kingdom. In the history of the evolution of the Navy, this book is actually, I think, more critical than the two that came before. Tom and Tim, check me out on this, but this is the point at which the Manties are really beginning to understand how little they understand about building a modern Navy.
Yes, I would agree with that.
And
they better figure it out, because they're about to go from being Denmark to being the British Empire.
Yeah. What does it mean to discover the wormhole junction? I mean, what does that even mean within the context of the series?
I mean, the wormhole is going to be the linchpin of Manticoran economic domination for the next hundreds of years. They have no idea, really, at this point in time. There's only been 7 or 8 of them discovered. So, people are still just understanding how much it's going to change commerce and travel and warfare in the universe.
Yeah, Tom is our keep us all sane guy while we're working on this in terms of where we are and what's happening. Tom, check me on this. Has there been a successful wormhole transit at all at this point?
Yes.
Or are we still in the... Okay, there has been.
Yeah. There have been a handful at this point, but not very many. I think less than a dozen at this point in time.
Okay. So how do people get around in there is faster than light travel, right? Through in-space, as you guys call it.
Yes, hyperspace.
But it's
there's
slow.
H-space, which is hyperspace, and normal space, which is in-space. And in-space really exists. Hyperspace is maybe a little more doubtful. But the difference is that the maximum apparent velocity that you can obtain in hyperspace, it still takes about a month to travel from Manticore to the Sol system. By using the wormhole junction, you can make the trip in less than a week, because it connects to a star only 40 light years from Earth, as opposed to being 600 light years from Earth. And the wormhole transportation is effectively instantaneous. So it's kind of like Manticore finds itself living next door to the Panama Canal, which connects to the Suez Canal, which also connects to the Cape of Good Hope, and which also connects to the Straits of Magellan. That's the kind of centrality to the transportation nexus of the galaxy this wormhole constitutes. It's the biggest in known space. It connects all around the periphery of the explored zone, and there are other wormholes out there that can tie into it to produce this entire huge sprawling network of, boy, we can get there a lot faster kind of thing.
So the stakes are huge in this series.
Oh yeah.
Who's Travis Long? I mean, when we first met him, he wasn't even an officer in the RMN.
So when we first met him,
he was just a recruit.
But
he was a recruit.
When we first met him, he was hanging out in bad company. Yeah.
Well, there's that, yes.
Yeah. The thing that I love about Travis, but there are a lot of things to like about Travis, because he is such an adorably foot in my mouth character who is really a capable, very smart, even brilliant human being. But the thing that I love about him is that he just sort of discovered that the Navy was absolutely the one place in the entire galaxy where he could have been happy. Okay, I mean, it just sort of happened. And one thing, actually, and Tim, I don't think you and I have actually discussed this, but I realized it a while back. The Star Kingdom of Manticore's Navy has a very pronounced tradition of Mustangs, of officers who began as enlisted, and the Solarian League, which they're up against, does not. And in a way, I'm seeing this almost as Travis is a pattern that the RMN adopts, because they're building their Navy, and there are going to be a lot of him at this stage in it. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, and because of that, you're going to have ultimately less career and political appointees, and you're going to start getting the real talent getting to the top.
Yeah, now, between this time and Honor, you get to a point at which the aristocracy is dominating the Navy. You know, you have some of that dynastic corruption and watching each other's backs, but the willingness to admit guys off the deck plates into the bridge is sort of set into the RMN's DNA at this point, and Travis is a big part of that, I think.
Now, Travis, you have said before, and Tim has said before, even that Travis is a favorite character of his, in that this sort of he's very different from Honor in that he really is like, although Honor, of course, is a stickler for detail, and Travis really likes going by the rules, but at the same time, he thinks out of the box, like Honor in many ways. It's a weird combination.
Well, okay, Tim, you should take this one, because you really did more of building Travis's character initially than anybody else.
I was building the character, but I was also in many ways living it. Travis is probably the closest thing I've ever written to my own personality. I do tend to follow the rules. I tend to, I will turn off my computer when the flight attendant says to turn it off, etc. But at the same time, I would not be able to write good fiction or enjoyable fiction if I couldn't think outside the box and come up with characters who are clever. So in many ways, Travis's mix is the same as I've got myself.
And I think that in some ways, and we talked about this while we were working on the rewrite for this book, the editing on it. Travis, without the ego, is more Odysseus than Achilles. Okay? Travis is the guy who is thinking outside the box, let's come up with the sneaky way to do this. Honor is kind of a midway house between him and somebody like Alistair McKeon, who is a, head down, bull in, and, fight until somebody blows up kind of mentality. So we have sort of a spectrum of personality types going on here, and I think that's one of the strengths of the Travis Long series, is that it's a different Navy in a different time, and you need different people. You see what I'm saying?
And it's evolving towards what we see 400 or 500 years later. It's moving. It's moving in the direction, but it's still a process of evolution. It's a lot of fun to really explore that kind of process and where the Navy is and how they think about things, not just technologically, but socially and administratively. How it's built and how it's organized, and how they're sort of culturally building themselves into what they become by Honor's time.
Well, and the other thing that's going on here is we're building the Star Kingdom at the same time. There's constitutional crises and the evolution of the monarchy and the House of Lords all going on at the same time.
Yeah, I want to ask you all about that momentarily. I was going to get into the story, but let's perhaps explore a little bit more the Travis's friends and his colleagues that he has to deal with, like Lisa and Chomps. Who are these folks, and how do they fit into the RMN?
Well, Lisa was an officer when he was just a grunt on his first ship. She hauled him off to do some work that nobody was getting around to doing, and they started just working on a friendship, as much of friendship as they could have, since she was higher ranking than he was, and Travis follows the rules. Chomps was another cadet with him who ran afoul of something and wound up in a place, shall we say, that no one expected anyone to go. We won't give anything away because of that. But they were just colleagues who he wound up running into as he began his career and has hung on to.
Yeah, there's a kind of running joke throughout Call to Vengeance that Lisa is not Travis's special friend, right?
Well, Travis is the only one who thinks that, but yes, it is true.
No. Lisa does too. She denies it at least once.
Yeah, but Lisa is denying it, I think, for public consumption. Travis is denying it for internal consumption. Okay. And I got to tell you, that resonated with me in a way because when I first met Sharon, my first wife and I had been separated for a year, and I was running so scared that for 8 years, it's like, Sharon is my buddy, Sharon is my good friend, Sharon is my, oh crap, kind of moment when I realized that I needed to propose to my best friend. So I was all on board with Travis for that part. I was like, you idiot, get a move on, because but I could really that whole thing really worked for me. One of the things about Chomps is he's actually the first Sphinxian to appear, the first native-born Sphinxian to appear anywhere in the Honorverse, I think.
Mm-hmm. I think
as a native character, at any rate. Yeah.
And
by the way, yes, but now what a lot of people may not realize, if they didn't read Shadow of Victory very carefully, is that Avars Tarakov's wife is directly descended from both Travis and Chomps.
Mm-hmm.
that brings up another issue of that because David, for some reason, 20-odd years ago, didn't think to include Travis in any of his books or memories of him, whatever Travis accomplishes has to be, I don't know, but everything Travis accomplishes has to be kind of kicked under the rug for various, usually political reasons, so that he is not known in Honor's Day as Edward Saganami would be, for example. So we've had to work out, Travis is doing really well, and the people who he works with recognize this, but the history books really aren't going to mention him. Well, at least the Manticorean history books aren't.
Well, we do have a few things that are going for us here. For example, if you look at the U.S. Navy, everybody remembers John Paul Jones. Okay, fewer people outside the rarefied ranks of the Navy remember John Barry at all. There are other officers in the U.S. Navy. Edward Truxton was huge in terms of building the professional officer corps, and the Navy's named ships after him, but nobody outside the Navy knows who he is. So Travis can be a very important, very influential officer during his own lifetime, and simply be one of those guys who gets sort of history missed him. He went a little sideways, if you know what I'm saying. Now, it is true that he is not going to be an Honor Harrington. He's going to be more like the original Horatio Hornblower, in the sense that Hornblower was well known throughout his lifetime. He was very successful, but he was never at any of the actual big historical battles. because Forster was writing in an existing history and refused to create artificial, roles for him at Trafalgar or something to make it work. And so Travis is going to be more of the made huge contributions, deeply respected by the core of the professional Navy of his time, and 400 years later, why did we name that building at the Academy after this guy? Kind of thing. You see what I'm saying?
There is a on Sagnami Island. There is a one of the dorms for incoming students is Longhouse, but most people think it's just because it's kind of long, and they don't really look at the plaque buried in the back of the dusty corner of the wall. So,
so there was by the way, quantum leap into this past somehow to transfer that to David's book.
Well, I have to say also another thing that's in Shadow of Victory is it turns out that the Long family, which is still around, has a yacht that it's had for a long time, which is called the Kaiser's Gift. And Travis he and the Andromani are sort of talking to each other in the course of this book. So I'm not going to say there's any connection here, but there could be.
Well, it's possible. One of the mechanisms you've built into the book to damp down the recognition that Travis receives is the fact of his family and who he's related to. He has got a weird mother and a bit of a wimp of a brother, right? I mean,
his brother is just has hooked up with his brother is hooked up with the more anti-Navy side of politics, and some of that spills over onto Travis and his reputation.
Yeah.
Well, and also I'll say this: one of the things that is cool to me about the political context is that. And I did not necessarily envision this going in. This more grew out of Tim and his brother's interactions and whatnot. The case for building a Navy in Honor Harrington's time is crystal clear. You got to have a Navy when you're the biggest maritime power in the world. And then you've got the threat of the Republic of Haven coming, so you have to build up. When Travis comes along, the Navy is about to be pretty much abolished or built down into, we got some gunboats, because nobody knows about the wormhole junction. And battle cruisers tie up a whole lot of tonnage in one or two places when what you need is multiple search and rescue vessels. You need a Coast Guard. You don't need a Navy. And basically, the guys that Travis's brother is hooked up with are trying to build the Coast Guard, not the Navy. Now, they're not doing it for selfless reasons, okay? They're doing it because they're career politicians and this is a way to do it. But their argument actually is more valid than the big Navy argument until the wormhole junction comes along. So the politics are a lot more balanced than they are by Honor's time. Okay, Honor's Star King. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and we've worked very hard to make both sides reasonable given what they know.
Yes. In Honor's time, you've got an existential threat to the existence of the Star Kingdom that everybody who doesn't have his head buried firmly in the sand can see coming. Okay, Travis's time, right up until the very first attack on Manticore, or even after it, the question of do we need a Navy? It's not clear cut. There's like I say, if it were not for the wormhole junction, they would not have needed a Navy. And as far as anybody knows, there is no wormhole junction till those rotten, nasty people in the Solarian League say, "Oh, we think there's a wormhole junction there. Let's go take it."
But at this point, they're being attacked by these pirates that know something's there, and they do need a Navy in a call to vengeance.
Yes, well, the pirates
but they don't know
why.
What's
there. Yeah. And the Manticorans don't know why either. That's true.
Yeah.
Why they're being attacked at this point.
Breakwater, while he may be right, is also a bit of a nasty fellow who is the Coast Guard, who's the guy that wants to maintain the power of the Coast Guard, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Tom, Tim, I would have to say that Breakwater, when we first meet him, when he has not yet found himself actually losing ground to the Navy group, isn't quite the scum-sucking bottom feeder that he becomes later on. Would you go along with that?
Yeah, I think Breakwater is self-serving, and he's an empire builder.
Yeah.
But he's not wrong.
No.
He's got a good point at the time. Given the metric he's looking at, it is financially more viable to build a lot of small ships that can carry a couple of box launchers each and overwhelm anybody who stumbles into the system. For where Manticore was at the time, that's not wrong.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that my feeling is, and Tim, you're actually, I pity you for this, but you're more inside Breakwater's head than most of the rest of us. But it seems to me that
he does drift. He drifts towards the edge in the last couple of books here. Yeah.
And it's almost like, and I hate to say this because Lord knows we don't need to be bringing contemporary politics into it, but it's almost like a polarization of the political process as the sides are drawn. People settle more into because I said so rather than in terms of rational argument. Do you see what I'm saying?
I agree with that. Their lines are drawn, and yeah.
And that's one of the things that I really like about this series is the fact that the politics are evolving on a domestic front, on a domestic scale, because the nature of the external threat is unknown. You follow what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Because they can't point and say, well, it's the Andromani, it's the Havenites, it's the this. There's an amorphousness to the threat that's being faced that lets the domestic politics, I think, be more interesting than they would be otherwise. In the Honorverse, there is domestic political fighting in Honor's time and whatnot, but the crux of the politics are interstellar. And here, they're intrasystemic, if you follow the distinction I'm making.
Yeah.
Well, tell us
the situation.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Tim.
We have the situation where there are patterns starting to come out of the assaults and the threats against Manticore, but they're not, as David says, so clear-cut as they are in Honor's time. Everybody can look at the same data and draw different conclusions, more or less reasonably.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because everybody is trying to analyze very limited data sets. And because of that, analysts mirror image. They have to. If they don't have data, they say, well, why would I be doing this? And if you have different analysts, they come up with different mirror images. And that's part of what's going on with the Star Kingdom here. And then you have cranked in on top of the who's out there and why are they trying to do nasty to us? You have this evolving domestic political situation in which, just to make the Mantis' lives perfect, we completely screw up the succession.
Well, tell us about what, before you give away anything that happens in the book. Tell us how does the constitutional monarchy work, and what's the line of succession as we begin, and what might screw that up?
When we start the book, we have Edward Winton as the king. His father Michael has abdicated, and his son Richard was killed in the Battle of Manticore. So his daughter Sophie is the next in line for the throne. Edward didn't really want the throne. Oh, does she not want to be? Nor did her father, really, not at the time. Nor did really her grandfather. It was really Roger Winton and his daughter Elizabeth were the founders, and both of them were 100% on board. They created the monarchy together. When Roger died, Elizabeth took over and built an incredibly, sort of built on what her father had made and strengthened the monarchy and strengthened the Star Kingdom.
Let me throw something in here. Initially, the Star Kingdom was not a kingdom at all. It was an elective republic in many respects, consisting of the shareholders in the original expedition. When the plague came through and nearly wiped out the colony, they realized they were going to have to import a lot of warm bodies to save it. And the surviving original shareholders and their kids set out to create an explicit aristocracy which would control the balance of power in the Star Kingdom and would consist of them. And that was how they were going to avoid losing control of their colony when they brought in all these immigrants from everywhere. So the original Constitution is definitely skewed in favor of the House of Lords as opposed to the House of Commons, whose members are elective. And neither Roger nor Elizabeth Winton really liked the extent to which the aristocrats were given their bite, their hold on power, but they recognized that this was the only way they were going to get the rest of the board of directors to sign up on bringing in the colonists they needed. So they had to accept it. One of the key provisions of the Constitution that the Wintons insisted upon, and which promotes a lot of the tension in this book, is that the heir to the crown must marry outside the aristocracy, must marry a commoner. And there were a lot of reasons for this, but it's a fundamental core requirement of the Constitution. But the monarchy that the Wintons intended to build from the get-go wasn't the one that the House of Lords thought they were going to build. And this sets up a tension which continues all the way down to Honor's Day in the government of the Star Kingdom. Now, by Honor's time, there are a lot of things that have been ironed out. There are traditions in place. But even as late as Honor Harrington's time, the Constitution requires that the Prime Minister must come from the Lords and cannot come from the Commons because of the way the Constitution was skewed in the aristocracy's favor to begin with. So I just wanted to kind of get that run out as the foundation that the current monarch's problems rest on in this book.
Yeah. Well, so Sophie is a daredevil, crazy kid who'd rather be climbing mountains or flying hang gliders. And she's sort of mentored by Elizabeth, her aunt. What is Elizabeth's take on the monarchy, which becomes rather important in the book?
Tim?
Oh, she's, they're her family. She thinks, her brother and her niece are both nuts for liking the daredevil stuff. She is coming off of the death of her husband a few years ago. So the whole and of course Richard, the king's son, also died just a few months ago in the attack on Manticore. So there's plenty of family pain to go around at this point.
Yeah. Well, and also Elizabeth's husband was killed in a big game hunting accident, and I think that impacts some of her attitude towards why do you want to do these crazy things.
Yeah. So there is something that goes on with that as well that forms a big part of the book that is cool and intricate and a lot of action to do with that. But can we talk about the space battles a little bit? So, missiles, lasers, or torpedoes? Go.
Okay. One of the reasons why I'm so happy to have Tim and Tom involved in writing this book, these books, is that you need for the technology to not only be much less capable, but it needs to be in a chain of development that will make what happens by Honor's time reasonable. And Tom has been the lead on that, and I think he has done a marvelous job. I mean, he and I have talked about stuff, and I had some concepts about it, but in terms of turning it into a coherent and developed bag of warfighting technology, I think he's really done a good job. Tom, you want to talk about some of the differences between Honor's time and Travis's?
I think the main difference we're looking at right now is the fact that these warships are comparatively fragile compared to Honor's time, where the ranges are very much lower. The missiles all have, there's no laser heads like in Honor's time. The missiles all have contact nukes, and really the war, you fire missiles off and you hope one gets through, because if one does get through, just one, it's going to be a kill on a smaller ship and even a mission kill on a larger ship. And that really, you're looking at a environment that's a lot more like the naval battles, sort of Cold War and modern naval warfare, where you have this sort of pulse model of warfare where you're trying to get everything off as soon as possible because you want to overwhelm their defenses and get that one hit, as opposed to Honor's time where you still have to worry about overwhelming their defenses, but it's more of a salvo model, like a gunfire model, where you're smashing into the other ship and they're smashing you over and over again. In Travis's time, the first hit, the first effective hit is going to win, is going to kill the opponent. And if you've got a squadron of ships, if you can fire first and you can fire effectively, you could get away without any damage to yourself and almost completely wipe out the enemy. So it really changes the way they think about combat. The fact that we don't have sidewall gun ports, and the sidewalls are comparatively more powerful, in that the missiles have more trouble getting through them, means you're often fighting nose to nose. You're crossing your own T all the time because the broadside doesn't exist yet. So it really does change. It changes the tactics. It changes the way they think about combat, the way the pace of combat.
You're dealing a lot more with... Go ahead, Tom.
I was going to say we're at the cusp of a change there, and that's what becomes really interesting. Looking at the sort of the path of the Travis novels is figuring out how fast that change is happening and how much Travis will end up seeing of the evolution of naval warfare. We're going to see some of it as Travis gets older. He'll see little bits of it, sort of pieces poking through of what you would recognize, what a modern Honorverse reader would recognize as sort of the classic warfare in the books.
And Travis is going to be play a fundamental role in that evolution. But by Honor's time, you see the transition that's taking place in Travis's time fully mature, and it's actually been the status quo for 100 years or so. And by the end of the Honor novel that will be coming out this fall, you're almost back to the pulse model because of the introduction of the missile pod and the extreme ranges at which you can engage. It's no longer a case of if you get a single hit through, you can take the ship out. It's that you can fire so many thousands of missiles that you're going to get hundreds of hits through. And so even a really tough ship can be basically torn apart in an eye blink by one of these massive missile salvos because they're tightly synchronized, and the ship may be hit by literally dozens or even hundreds of bomb-pumped grazers, X-ray lasers, that are each powerful enough to blast through a super dreadnought's armor. So in a way, you're almost back to it. To me, one of the things that to me is fundamental to good military science fiction is that it has to deal with the evolution of the tactical and the strategic environment. And that's one of the things I tried to do in the Honor Harrington novels, and it's something that Tim and Tom are doing really, really well in building backwards, as it were, to the Travis model.
I think it'll be interesting to see as we reach the end of or not the end, but sort of the peak of that style of combat in the modern Honorverse, as we're also talking in the books, we're reaching the point where, I mean, this is actually right now and right now for Travis, Gustav Andermann is writing his book, Sternenkrieg, where he talks about a lot of this sort of, how his views on warfare. And it's a sprawling book that covers all aspects. But I could see Honor's contemporaries and Honor herself rereading that book and seeing a lot of parallels in terms of the tactics of warfare that haven't been true for hundreds of years, that are becoming true again.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is that in the Honorverse, in Honor's time, they're also going to be looking for ways to mitigate the for opening salvo wins model, and they have a few notions about how this might happen, but it is a lot of fun from the writer's perspective to be able to play with how this is going to evolve and change, and the extent to which the warfighting technology informs the views of the tacticians, and the extent to which the views of the tacticians drive the development of the warfighting technology. That was one of the big conflicts between Sanjay Hemphill and Hamish Alexander, early on in the Honorverse books, because they were in this live or die situation, and they were both afraid to go all in on the other side's approach, if you see what I'm saying. So
I'm sitting here being amused by David talking about throwing thousands of missiles. In Travis's time, they might have as well be made of platinum, because you can't even use them for practice. They're that big and expensive, and we don't have very many of them.
Yeah. Well, your magazines don't have very many in them either.
Yeah, it is a very different model, and it's been really it's been a fun exercise for me, because I sort of building these models of combat and these models of technology for different time slices of the Honorverse. Travis is the one that I spent the most time in after Honors, but I've been looking at other chunks as well. And I'm sort of doing this like David has, he's written 20 books, and he casually tosses out, in such and such a date, such and such a thing happened. And it's just sort of, it sounds like a good time, a good date at the time. And the one thing I like about working with David is he thinks about these things. He doesn't really completely arbitrarily toss them off, but he's still a writer, and he can't, he doesn't make an entire timeline map when he does that in terms of saying when the gun port existed. But that's in the book. And, and we sort of, and we have those anchor points. And for me, it's actually, in some ways, the constraints on the design, or the constraints on my work, are actually liberating for me, because I can sort of put those in as anchors. And then all I have to do is figure out, how do I get from point A to point B? And sometimes they're weird, and it tells stories. I mean, the stories that Tim and David tell are, prose, and they can, they write about people, and they write, they write stories that people want to read. The stories that I tell often have spreadsheets and columns of numbers and things like that. But there are interesting stories in there that I can add to this process, simply because I discover little things as I'm doing that. Like, wow, we don't have grav plates now, but we really should. And so there's got to be an interesting reason why we don't. So that's been a fascinating part of this process for me, is figuring out how to make that kind of thing work from dates that have just sort of scattered around.
Well, to me, it's important when you're building a literary universe that it have solid underpinnings. You're going to have to use, the right isotope of unobtainium or whatever in different places in it, because you're writing science fiction and they need to be able to do interstellar travel. Okay, well, that's going to be a problem, with what we currently can model on terms of our understanding of the physics of the universe. But within that constraint, there have got to be limitations as well as opportunities. There have to be things you can't do as well as things you can. And the characters have to work around those limitations.
That was part one of a two-part interview with David Weber, Timothy Zahn, and Thomas Pope, discussing their new entry in the Manticore Ascendant series, A Call to Vengeance. Part two of the interview will be available next time on the podcast. This is another entry in Alliance of Equals, a Liaden Universe novel by Sharon Lee and Steve Miller. Beset by the angry remnants of the Department of the Interior and challenged at every turn by opportunists on their new homeworld of Surebleak and low on funds, Clan Corval desperately needs to reestablish its position as one of the top trading clans in known space. To this end, Master Trader Sean Yoskalen and Corval's premier trade ship, Dutiful Passage, is on a mission to establish new business associations and to build a strong primary route that links well with existing loops and secondary routes. But reestablishing trade and preserving the lives of the few remaining members of the clan aren't all of Corval's problem. Matters come to a head as Dutiful Passage, accustomed to being welcomed and feted at those ports on its call list, finds itself denied docking and blacklisting while agents of the DOI mount armed attacks on others of Corval's traders under the very eyes of port security systems. Traveling with Dutiful Trader on this unsettling journey is Paddy Yoskalen, the master trader's heir and his apprentice. Paddy is eager to make up for time lost due to Corval's unpleasantness with the Department of the Interior, but she is also keeping a secret so intense that her coming of age and perhaps her very life is threatened by it. And here is the latest entry in Sharon Lee and Steve Miller's Alliance of Equals.
Chapter 26. Langlast Port, the Torridon Hotel. The short tour from the happy occasion to the hotel was like a public day at some other house's gardens, Paddy thought. One met only friends and agreeable acquaintances, and only glad subjects were discussed. The flowers, the weather, perhaps one's new coat, or a piece of Quinn's jewelry. Of course, public day at one's own house was rather less agreeable, for it always occurred on a day for which one had received several pleasant invitations, which, of course, had to be turned down in favor of welcoming strangers into the gardens, strolling among them to point out the best flowers or an exceptionally clever bit of topiary, and, of course, the refreshment trays. Not very much different now that she actually traversed the path from the duties of a host of a trade reception. The merchants they called briefly upon, no more than 5 minutes each, so as not, Father said, to wear out their welcome on the very first pass, seemed not to find them a burden. Indeed, there were smiles and exchanges of info keys and pleasant things said on both sides. Two wished the master trader to return on another day when they might talk at more depth. One prentice was desolate that his own master had not been able to be present when the traders called. She offered an info key, saying the master would be pleased to meet the traders at their convenience any time inside the next 2 days, if their stay on port would accommodate it. And so they progressed, with the hotel in sight and only 2 more shops between them and the entrance. Paddy sighed to herself. She was enjoying herself immensely, though whether she had learned anything would need to wait upon review. Though their progress was interesting, not just for the illustration of what an announcement in the port news, a direct letter to everyone listed in the Langlast Port Merchant Association, and a reception might do to create a favorable impression, it remained to be learned whether the favorable impression translated into equally favorable negotiations and concluded deals. She was just as happy to leave those discoveries for the morrow and the day after. Her head had begun to ache again, which she thought might be a lack of food. While there had certainly been sufficient food at the reception, she had felt it her duty to at least introduce herself to each guest and direct them to the refreshment tables. At the beginning, also, she had been nervous regarding the arrangements, but really, Ms. Hortensis had managed beautifully and produced a buffet reception that even Cousin Corrine must have pronounced unexceptional. In any case, she had rather stupidly not eaten anything, other than the samples, though she had managed a glass or two of the red juice, which had been very agreeable, though perhaps, in retrospect, a little sweet. They strolled into the second but last shop, a gem and jewelry emporium. The ample light was pure, and drawers of gemstones gleamed and glittered behind security crystal displays. Patty narrowed her eyes against the excessive brightness as a tall and willowy person came out from behind the counter to bow gracefully to them. Surprisingly, it was a full Liaden bow between business associates. "Master trader, welcome to my establishment. I am Torona Rusk, and this—" A graceful motion of the hand drew their attention to the glittering displays, "is the Garden of Gems." Torona Rusk spoke the high tongue with an accent, but her mode did not falter. Also, as between business associates, which was, perhaps, a little forward, thought Patty, as they had concluded no business, but which also showed a willingness to proceed in an association. Father bowed, and Patty did. "Forgive me," Father said upon straightening. "I had not expected to hear the language of home here on Langlast. I hope I have not offended." "Indeed, no, merely a surprise, and that not unpleasant at the end of a long day. I wonder, did you perhaps attend the University of Solsintra?" Torona Rusk laughed gently. "No, scholar, she said, raising a hand. "Always it was the stones with me, and the fabrication of settings which might be worthy of them." Another small bow. "I had the honor to sit as Moonell's prentice in the Avenue of Jewels at Solsintra Port." "I'll wager he drove you harder than any professor," Father said. "Doubtless he did, and why not? Should I waste the master's time and generosity by shirking my lessons or creating that which was less than inspired? May I ask, how fares Moonell? Still at work in the Avenue of Jewels?" Father sighed and bowed gently as the bearer of unfortunate news. "I regret. Moonell has gone ahead, doubtless to fashion more perfect settings for the stars." The shop in the Avenue of Jewels stood empty when last I was on Solsintra Port. "Ah." The jeweler bowed her head and swayed somewhat. When she looked up, her eyes were damp, but her face was properly smooth. "It grieves me to hear it, though it ought be no surprise. One likes to recall those who illuminated one's life as unchanged and ever-continuing. But it is as you say, he has doubtless embraced a higher art, which we mere students hold no hope of comprehending." There was a small pause, so that they might admire the phrase, before the jeweler spoke again. "Do you make a long stay here on Langlast Port?" "A few days, perhaps as long as a local week. Tomorrow's tour will tell the tale." "Of course. Please, allow me to offer you this." An info key was proffered. Father took it gracefully and offered his in turn. "My thanks. For now, let me not keep you longer from your rest. Come again before you leave us. It would please me if we could identify a mutual benefit." "We will of course come again," Father promised. And with that, they sought the door. "Vessel approaching," Dilnem said firmly from the pilot's chair. "Langlast portmaster identification." He did not say that this meant nothing. The 3 ships that had pursued Pale Wing had, after all, been able to show an affiliation, however tenuous, with legitimate Liltander security. Priscilla frowned at the screens over the third mate's shoulder. The approaching vessel looked to be a working ship of some kind. Scans showed armament, 2 small guns, and very little armor. Port ID. "Query their purpose for approach," she said. Dilnem did that, nodded, and glanced over his shoulder to Priscilla. "Customs boat, Captain. They state routine flyby and advise that we will see them at intervals." A pause. "They will release camera drones and magnetometers. This is standard procedure." "Port database confirms ID," said pilot Jorik on comm. Priscilla nodded. "Log them," she said. "Aye, Captain," said Jorik. "All occasions?" "All occasions."
That was another entry in the complete audiobook serialization of Alliance of Equals by Sharon Lee and Steve Miller. And that's it for the podcast. Thanks to Audible.com and to podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. And the tribute of 1/5 of the produce from 27 reconstructed Dyson spheres rising to feudalism after the fall of star empires and galactic futures exchanges, plus the thanks and praise of readers versed in honor everywhere to David Weber, Timothy Zahn, and Thomas Pope, authors of A Call to Vengeance. Please join us next time here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.